There's a song, I'd like you to listen carefully to the words.
What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that Washington never told a lie. I learned that soldiers seldom die. I learned that everybody's free. That's what the teacher said to me, and that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that policemen are my friends. I learned that justice never ends. I learned that murderers die for the crimes, even if we make a mistake sometime. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned our government must be strong. It's always right and never wrong. Our leaders are the finest men, and we elect them again and again. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school. What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that war is not so bad. I learned about the great ones we have had. We fought in Germany and in France, and someday I might get my chance. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school.
Thank you. I've taken this opportunity to take off my mask, as long as you all promise to keep yours on. That song is from 1963. Most people in the room perhaps, I'm not too sure if you were all born then. I know there are some Baholo who were. But I know when I shared this song with some people, told them about it, they'd never heard about it. But it's part of our generation. I was already born, and it's an incredibly important song. It was written by Tom Paxson, and it was sung by Pete Seeger. For those who remember those times. And I think what the song tells us about is it calls for critical thinking, it calls for learning from experiences, and it also puts forward the relativity of truth, the truths which we're taught at school. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of each and every one of you here, both those here in person as well as those online, but I specifically wish to acknowledge the presence of Baholo Barona. And I'd like to thank you very much, Auntie Barbara, Rekidikule, Baholo, for being here with us today. Secondly, I'd like to congratulate Letsoletse Mutsidi Diamang and Lahabibo, as well as the entire LGBTIQ community, for the Monday ruling of the Court of Appeal in the decriminalization case. It has been a long and challenging journey. I'd also like today to recognize that it's the 1st of December, World AIDS Day. The theme today is End Inequalities, End AIDS. And I'd like us to remember all those who have lost their lives to it and those who are living it, together with the additional challenge of COVID-19. So back to learning. I'd like to share with you what I've learned along the way. My personal understanding of human rights has been within the context of dignity, inclusive equality, and justice. I began my journey with human rights many, many years ago, long before I even knew that they were known by that name. I was conscious of my place in my family and in my community. I was conscious of what was appropriate behavior and what was not. I learned the importance of greeting others, whether or not I knew them or would ever see them again. I later learned it was an important way of reaffirming that I was a part of my community and that it was a part of me. I learned that it was important to respect everyone. I also learned that there was special respect for those who were older than I. I later learned that this was to reaffirm life's journey which they had walked long before I was born. I also learned that the nature of my relationship with my community and my community with me had a special name. It was Boto. Boto has been variously described as an attitude, a way of life, a culture, a value, and a concept. but it lives in social relationships. It defines and characterizes the nature of relationships. It distinguishes between what is appropriate behavior and what is not. This norm is determined by the community of which one is a member. I am Tswana Sotho. My father was a Motswana and my mother was a Mosotho. And I have absolutely no doubt that Botho is the basis of the recognition that all human beings are people and are worthy of being respected. All human beings should be able to live their lives in and with dignity and to be treated accordingly. I also learnt that we had collective responsibility to and for others. In the 1980s, I lived in a Botswana which was surrounded by peoples engaged in liberation struggles. Liberation from colonial rule and apartheid in Mozambique, Angola, Southwest Africa, Rhodesia, and South Africa. Botswana hosted refugees. I learned that Botswana was the island of peace in the midst of a region in struggle. I also learned that as a result, we were vulnerable to attacks which were justified by those resisting liberation. There were supposed exercises called in hot pursuit of terrorists who were being harbored by Botswana. I learned that power seemed to give people the right to do as they please, with little regard for ideas such as independent states, sovereignty, and respecting the will of the people. Powerful states could invade less powerful states in the name of self-defense. I learned that bullying happens between states. I also learned that the racist ideology of apartheid, the epitome of the dehumanization by one human being of another, was but a tangible, formalized version of the indignities thrust upon human beings by other human beings, and that it is alive and well in our contemporary world. The murder of George Floyd in 2020 marked a moment of truth for us all. For some to learn, and for others to re-recognize how dehumanizing another makes all atrocities possible. To fail to respect the Botho, which binds us, regardless of religion, gender, skin color, social class, nationality, ethnicity, political persuasion, or indeed sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. To fail to respect that is to make others others. And to other others enables one human being to commit heinous atrocities against another. And this was noted in a 2017 BBC interview by Ben Ferencz, who was the youngest chief prosecutor of the Nazi Nuremberg trials after World War II. I understood why, during the difficult days of apartheid in South Africa, with regular deaths in detention, with the South African army in the townships, with the torture and murders of anti-apartheid activists, Archbishop Desmond Tutu called upon us all to pray for the oppressors while engaging in activism, a reminder of our common humanity. I learned that what drives me is the need to protect Botho, which is inherent in all human beings. The human rights framework is a mere tool to do just that. However, sometimes the tool risks becoming the reason for its very existence, regardless of the context within which it is used. I learned that cultural relativism is a dirty word, often used when non-Western norms are used to justify actions of discrimination which offend others, but not when Western norms do the same. I also learned about the concept of the right to offend. It emerged as justification for the use of cultural satire against those from different cultural paradigms when their fundamental belief systems were lampooned. I learned that my conceptualization of a universality of dignity as the basis of a universality of rights was often not shared by others. I learned too that there are major differences between the theory and the practice of the universality of rights. Many a time, the certainty of implementation is shaped by space and time, geography and political history. I've again learned this through the right to health and COVID-19. I've also relearned this through the recent COP26 on climate change, as powerful countries struggle to take responsibility for the impact of their legacies on less powerful countries, as we collectively and globally face an existential threat. What does and can a right to health realistically mean in our world of social and economic inequalities, inequities, and discrimination? My headmaster at Marwapula Secondary School, Dean Yates, repeatedly taught us in the 1970s that everyone should have a right to education, but that that was not the reality in our society. He also told us that those of us who had the privilege of access to education had a responsibility to give back to our society. And I fell for that. I believed him. So I chose to give back through working in civil society. Through seeding and nurturing, ideas grew into projects, into programs, into independent organizations, as well as solidarity coalitions, such as Bonella, the Botswana Network on Law, HIV and AIDS in 1995, Lekhabibo, Lesbians, Gays and Bisexuals in 1998, the Domestic Workers Foundation in 2013, and Bolama, the Botswana Labour Migrants Association in 2015. All of these began life as Ditshwanelo projects, which grew into organizations. I learned, as many of us Africans do, that if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. Our Solidarity Coalition action was not only for Botswana through the CKGR NGO Coalition for the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, but also for people in our region through Botswana Civil Society Coalition for Zimbabwe, or KIZCOS, and most recently through the Southern Africa Human Rights Defenders Network. All of these actions were driven by recognition of our common humanity. At global level, international promises are made and targets agreed upon. Shared commitments to principles are also publicly proclaimed, such as leave no one behind. The COVID-19 pandemic has tested us all. Do we actually mean what we say? Are we truly committed to treating everybody equally? As Dr. Ali Kija of the African Union Vaccine Delivery Alliance stated on the 28th of November this year, the latest variant appears to be a result of, quote unquote, the world's failure to vaccinate in an equitable, urgent, and speedy manner, as well as of, quote unquote, the hoarding of vaccines by high-income countries. The politics of it all was sharply displayed in what she described as, quote unquote, keeping the unvaccinated Africans out, through the immediate travel bans which were implemented targeting the southern African countries of Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, South Africa, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. This was later extended to include the entire Southern Africa region by countries in other regions which themselves began to register cases. So will the travel bans be extended to all the countries which register cases, I wonder? Are we prepared to address the legacies of our varied histories of racism, of colonialism, and other forms of abuse, of power and exploitation? That in 2021, we should be applauding the return of a minuscule portion of African property stolen during the colonial era as part of the colonial project marks a teeny-weeny step along a long journey of reckoning, apology, and acceptance. This includes the return of the Benin bronzes to Africa. According to some reports, approximately 90% of Africa's heritage is not on the continent. We too need to look into our own societies to address not yet atoned for acts of injustice towards one another. That in 2021, we should be debating whether respecting intellectual property rules and unequal power relations is more important than ensuring justice and the saving of lives is deeply disturbing. Where is the Boto in this scenario? I've learned that those with power, political, military, and money power, can exercise it without regard to the Boto of others. I've learned that this self-centered exercise of power can happen in the family, in community, nationally, regionally, and globally. The inequitable access to vaccines marked yet another moment of truth for me. So you were right, Arnold. COVID-19 landed on the uneven grounds of socioeconomic and cultural stability. Some were less terra firma than others. Its ability to wreak havoc on families and communities began to level the ground through high rates of hospitalization and death, until what many call vaccine nationalism, when countries hoarded vaccines, and vaccine apartheid, where there was a concentration of vaccines in wealthy countries, reared their ugly heads, distinguishing yet again the powerful from the less powerful, those with access from those without. Gone were the platitudes of allocation on the basis of need, and no one is safe unless everyone is safe, and leave no one behind, while we were already talking about building back better. Producing vaccines for Africa in Africa is emerging as the way to go, as South Africa, Rwanda, and Senegal work on this approach, each to their own, appears to be the way to long-term solutions, with less regard paid for notions of community humanity and global social justice. So what about rights? What about our role as civil society? What are we doing about the unacceptable gap between the rich and the poor? And how do we attain inclusive social justice? What we all have in common is the desire to live and be treated with dignity, to have access to political, social, and economic opportunities. This is a universal truth. It forms the basis of the human rights paradigm, regardless of where you live, how you look, what you say, or which religion you follow. In our contemporary global world, where our focus is increasingly on how different we are, where you live has determined the extent to which you experience the ravages of climate change. How you look determines your social acceptability. What you say may make you a foreign agent and a danger to the safety, stability, and reputation of your country. And which religion you follow determines whether or not you're considered to be a terrorist. The universality of human rights speaks to a universal commitment to ensuring that the dignity of everyone is protected, both as individuals and as members of their communities. At times, what I call the legal frameworking of human rights can lead us to applaud legal victories, which risk remaining hollow victories if they are not able to change the lives of the violated for the better. Does a legal recognition of, for example, the right to health lead to increased access to vaccines in our unequal world? We see this too in the international and regional declarations, conventions, and covenants. These are all lofty expressions of good intent, but our daily challenge as human rights activists and defenders is how to make those real for those whom we serve and accompany on the ground. What I've learned is that democracy is rooted in recognizing the value of the person, the motho. Botho is therefore the bedrock of our democracy in Botswana. It should in turn provide a conducive environment for the recognition, promotion, protection, and respect of human rights. It all sounds rather straightforward, right? However, societies are held together by the glue of culture, which is not static and which is open to change. Whenever I have had doubts about how to make sense of confusing situations, I turn to what I know best, my North Star, Botho. I've learned that our culture shapes our thinking, our worldview, and how and where we see ourselves fitting into the world. It also shapes our understanding of human rights and how they can be implemented with respect for one another, with respect for diversity of thought and opinion, and engaging with one another with respect. So what does democracy mean in Botswana? It would appear that we have slipped into the formalistic cut and paste version of 3 arms of government, regular multi-party elections, independent judiciary, independent institutions, and what else? It has become a box-ticking exercise. Perhaps it always was simply that for many of our people. How do we make it mean much more? How do we shift the discourse from us being what Uli Golazinski has referred to as political consumers of democracy to true participants of democracy? For Botswana, process is critically important and colors the legitimacy of its outcome. If it's not inclusive and consultative, it's followed in rote fashion and it effectively loses its meaning and significance. For human rights to truly take root in our society, the concept has to be an inclusive one, which is understood by our people. Botho has been understood and accepted as part of our DNA for generations. Although this does not always seem to be the case for our youth, who continue to explore ways of finding the fit between the global world and Botswana for longer than those precious Twitter seconds. Active citizen engagement needs rootedness for it to be sustained. This is a challenge of our times. And how can we effect it? Leadership, mentoring, supporting, active listening, and constructive engagement are critical. Human rights activism is not a time-bound project able to be assessed by logical framework tools of analysis. It has no expiry date. It is a lifelong mission. That we live in an intricately interconnected world is not disputed, as the recent drowning of the 27 migrants in the English Channel between France and the United Kingdom has shown. What has shockingly emerged is a blame game between 2 countries and finger-pointing at those engaged in people smuggling instead of cutting to the chase. Authoritarian governments, climate change, violence, and economic opportunities drive migration. Governments need to be realistic about the drivers and existence of migration, as well as their own roles in all of these. Inclusive social justice needs to be truly on their agenda, tackling causes and not only symptoms. The opportunities which I've been given by others to experience, to make mistakes, to grow from and through them, to journey and to just be, have all provided me with a rich tapestry of valuable learnings. Through my work at the presidency of the FIDH, the International Federation for Human Rights, through my board membership of the International Service for Human Rights, the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, as well as the other foundation, I've learned of violations across the world, from Zimbabwe to Yemen, from Afghanistan to Brazil, from India to France, from Belarus to the United States of America, and from South Africa to Sudan. And I've learned that solidarity with those being persecuted for holding different opinions, for having different religious beliefs, for looking different, can be shown through protest action, through social movements, through litigation, lobbying, and activism. This has been my minute contribution from Botswana to the efforts of selfless human rights defenders, activists, and communities. In conclusion, I believe that FES can continue to play a critically important role in supporting, not leading, us as we rediscover who we are, as we see what needs to be done to build back better, and as we determine how best that can be done as we journey along that path. We are at a global crossroads, faced with major population displacements due to floods, droughts, wars, deficits of peace, and non-accountable leadership. I believe that we can focus on the reaffirmation of the universality of dignity, that which reaffirms our human connectedness, our boto. With that, accountability for past wrongs, prevention of future wrongs, and honesty about current wrongs can provide us with hope, trust, and faith in one another. This will be the basis for democracy and social justice for all. In a recent conversation, Lorata Moalusi and I agreed that we need to pass the values on to the next generation, about our work being based on conviction, a mission, a calling. It's more than just being a job. We stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. We should never be under the illusion that we can do anything on our own without others. I've learned too that cultures can learn from one another. In 1785, Friedrich Schiller wrote, and this is an English translation, "Thy enchantments bind together, what did custom stern divide? Every man becomes a brother, where thy gentle wings abide." In 1824, Ludwig van Beethoven immortalized this in his Symphony number 9, Ode to Joy. It later became the national anthem of the European Union. As I draw my comments to a close, I'd like to thank each and every one of you present and online who have journeyed with me so far, sometimes in peace and sometimes under less peaceful conditions. We still have some way to go. In thanking you all, I wish to dedicate this honor to my parents, the late Archibald and Lina Mogwe, to my Marapula Secondary School headmaster, the late Dean Yates, to our Ditswanalo patron, Archbishop Emeritus Khoto Makudu, who strongly encouraged my work, Basara San issues, to Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, and to my families, my Ditswanalo family and my own family, Ruth, Mark, Bahumi, and Musebe. They have all, every single one of them, played a hugely influential role in my life, and I thank them all from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Ke a leboga, and dankie schön. Thank you.